Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And some of you may know that Steph and I have been working on a podcast together, and today is the launch day. So we thought we would hop on YouTube and have a chat about our podcast and the launch, tell you a bit about what to expect and what we've talked about, and hopefully you might check it out. So hi, Steph. How are you feeling about launch day? We're finally here.
I can't believe we're here. This was so much fun. I'm having fun, and I can't wait to see what happens with it. So thanks for having me here too.
Great. So I think maybe giving people a chance to know what to expect. First of all, we've called the podcast Life After Diets. We talk a lot about, believe it or not, what it means after dieting. But I suppose the question that maybe I'll ask you is, why do you think it's important that we're having these conversations about life after dieting?
I think because it's lonely. I think that when you decide not to diet anymore, it takes a lot of energy just to get to that point or to arrive there a few times. And then when you do, it's hard to connect with other people that are thinking along those lines too. I think one of the most common things that I hear and that I felt was like there's so much refuge in the books and in social media, and then you go out in the world and it's like, oh, but no one in my real life is doing this. And it tends to feel lonely, and I think it also can create a lot of self-doubt sometimes, especially when we're feeling more vulnerable. So having another channel to hear voices and conversations and interactions and be able to ask questions on another platform around these topics is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Exactly that. And also for me, I think when we're trying to heal our relationship with food and our bodies, we know the things that are getting in the way. We know the problems. We know that dieting makes things worse, or a lot of people are realizing that now. We want to stop binge eating. We want to stop feeling a certain way. But I think too often we talk about stopping things rather than what is it we're trying to do instead. So it can sound like, okay, you wake up one day and you think diets don't work, so I'm just never going to diet again. And we've talked about this before. It's one of those decisions that you and I have certainly found that we have to make over and over again because it's everywhere. So coming back to that, and what is it now that we're focusing on if we're not focusing on dieting? What do we do with all that extra energy, right?
Yeah. You make podcasts and
turn it into a career.
Yeah, exactly. You got so much time. Yeah, for sure. And it is, I think that's another point to make is that this also is part of normalizing that experience too. And like understanding that, yeah, sometimes we make the decision and then we go out in the world and we're faced with the challenge of making the decision every day kind of thing, and having, that being okay too. And having conversations around that and what comes up really in life after dieting, and how sometimes it doesn't feel like a decision you make and then you march forward forever and ever. Sometimes it does. I think for some people it is. It's like, I made this decision and I never looked back. But, it can also feel, and validly so, like, it's hard and I keep questioning it, or I was doing great and then it feels like I went backwards, or, things like that. And so I think there's a lot of discussions to be had. And that our first, what we've done so far has just like scratched the surface. I feel like we could talk about so many things, and even the things that we've talked about, I could have kept talking about. Like, there was so much that kept coming up and so many avenues to take. And yeah, so there's no shortage of discussions around this.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I feel like you really brought to the podcast, we might have ended up there anyway, but in my mind, I was imagining this would be a podcast where we share a lot of wisdom and we tell people like how they can make their lives better. And a lot of it is us sharing our struggles and how we still fumble over this stuff today. So something that I really appreciate, the energy that you brought to the podcast, you were like, hey, let's talk about ourselves. Let's use ourselves, because that's how people are going to connect. Because we might work with this professionally, but we also work with this stuff all the time personally. So my hope for it, I think, is that people connect at the personal level through the sharing of our stories.
Yeah.
Which is episode 1.
I know, which was one of my favorites, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. Thank you for saying that, by the way. And because I find that what you bring to the podcast is like the calm, soothing. You speak much at a much more general pace than I do. I'm like, I have so much to say, and you just kind of make it feel comfortable. So thank you for that.
So at the time of recording this on launch day, we've got 8 episodes in the bag. And the original plan was, we said, we'll do 8 episodes, we'll call it a season, and we'll put it out there and we'll get some feedback. But it seemed pretty clear by about maybe episode 2, we were both like, yeah, we want to carry on doing this for a bit. Unless people tell us to go away, the hope is to keep this running for a while and just seeing if people get some stuff out of it.
Yeah. What was your favorite episode?
My favorite one was probably the one where we talked about self-compassion, because I think that is so misunderstood. And the bit that really stands out was how we talk about we can have compassion for other people much more than we can for ourselves. And most people know that. Most people see the truth of that. But there was something you said about that which stayed with me. And it was around, maybe it's because we don't see the shadows that other people, we don't see their dark corners. We know, like, the mean thoughts we have. We know our judgments. We know the times when we are acting or feeling in a way that just doesn't feel like good or kind. And we're somehow imagining that other people don't have these dark corners. We just see these people and we assume in some way they're, I don't even want to use the word better, but that we're the only ones that struggle with the darker stuff.
Yeah. Like we're the only, that was a really good conversation. Should we talk about what what our topics were or what we're going to be covering in the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, so the first one is our stories. We're going to share our stories. I think I've shared bits and pieces, but we go into it in a little bit more depth. And I think there was a lot of resonance, and that was a good way to start the podcast for us, I think, because I felt just much closer and connected to you from that first episode and connecting over our stories.
Agreed.
We haven't yet quite decided on the order, have we? So I know probably coming up, we've got another 2 that will probably be episodes 2 and 3. One was, why can't I stop eating? Do you want to say a bit about what that was?
Yeah, and that one we talked about the feeling of, okay, so I've stopped the dieting, but why do I want to eat all the things, and why didn't it just kind of solve itself? And the nuances of the urges to eat and the emotional eating components that can often follow when we give up dieting, because it's not like that decision itself is what, is what solves everything. There's so many layers that existed underneath it in the first place, and talking about the feelings around that and navigating it. And I think, and we talk, I mean, as usual, we shared about how we navigated that and the feelings we had around that, and how it looks sort of in the later phases of that, and how that resolves, and how to self-trust being a component of that too.
Mm-hmm. And just how scary it is to feel like you cannot stop eating, even though you think you're not hungry. Like your body might be full in that moment, but that desire to push through and keep eating. We talk a bit about deprivation, physical, mental and emotional. I remember you bringing in that talk of emotional deprivation, and I'd never thought of it like that. I thought of it as emotional eating, but I hadn't quite tied in the emotions and deprivation before. So I'm learning a lot from this podcast.
You know what? Me too. That's interesting, because I feel like every day that we recorded, first of all, like it was even though it's the same topics that I talk about every day and that I work with every day, it was just there was a different energy, and I felt like it was new. Like there was so much of it that felt new. And then I would recall so much of what was said later, and process it in a new way. Mm-hmm. I remember that particularly with the episode, I think it was one of the first ones we recorded, which was the food rules versus food boundaries. Mm-hmm. And I think that we defined boundaries slightly differently, or at least we went into the podcast with coming at that from a different angle and not knowing that. And then during the discussion, I remember being like, oh, okay. I mean, I understood the way you were defining it, which was just different than it had been in my mind. And over the course of that week, I remember even in non-food related things, just in life, I was like, boundary. Like this is a boundary versus a rule. And it was like just a new way of looking at it. It really stuck with me. And that generally tended to happen with different topics along the way. It was really interesting to watch how it like bled into life later.
Yeah, me too. It's opened up my thinking, exactly that, having these conversations and hearing your responses. Um,
Mm.
do you have a favorite episode? Is there one that stands out for you?
That one was actually that food boundaries and food rules was good. And I also really like the one about bad body image days or bad body image in general and how that was. And I also was a fan of the one about self-compassion. That one led into a whole bunch of different pockets of conversations that I enjoyed.
Yeah, the bad body image days. The bit that stands out for me around that, I shared that idea in that moment where you see yourself and you think you have a thought that's just unkind, or you're judging your body to not be good. And I shared with you, sometimes I think I've had a bit of a vulnerability hangover with these
Huh.
podcasts because I've shared a lot.
Mm.
And I shared with you how sometimes just catching sight of myself in that moment, I believe it, like fully
Yeah.
believe it, and having to talk myself down. And hearing you relate to that as well was really reassuring, because I think there was part of me that thought, you should always be able to watch your thoughts and never believe them. But I
Oh,
get hooked in, and then that sort of disentangling, is that a word? Yeah, why not?
that's what I
Um,
say. I use it.
so I think for me, actually, I found doing these episodes with you really validating in terms of the work that I feel like I'm continuing to do, because I've done a lot of work, but I feel like it's something I have to
Mm.
keep working at. And there's part of me that's going, shouldn't you be fixed by now? You
Yeah,
work with this
yeah.
stuff.
No, it's so normalizing to talk to you and I mean to just have these discussions and I mean like part of why it's so nice is because you hear someone else saying something you're like yeah I think that like and you were just not generally these topics aren't discussions we're having with people on the street or even sometimes our friends, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to hear. It was also there were so many moments too where you would share and give us little clips of like that you're a police officer and that you're like want to cry when it's cold. When you talked about that, I don't remember what was that in reference to being hungry. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
was the one about hunger. I don't know. Those were just little moments of feeling like just seeing someone in the details of someone and that I didn't know. I mean, we've never actually officially met, in person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to get those clips. I know maybe
Yeah.
they feel like vulnerability hangovers, but I eat that stuff up. No pun intended.
Well, I think I do too, because I feel like that's how I connect with people when they share things like that. But there's the whole therapist blank slate. How much should you self disclose? My
Mm,
industry is very, there's a whole
yeah.
spectrum on different levels of self disclosure, and I probably self disclose much more than, in fact, I do self disclose much more than the majority of my peers. So, actually, more than anything, this is another bit of self disclosure, I think I fear judgment from my peers more than I imagine
Yeah.
non therapists would be thinking.
I can definitely understand that and relate to that. I think about that sometimes as a coach because as a coach I don't have that same responsibility of really watching that barrier. In fact, I think as a coach, that is a tool I use is that
Mm-hmm.
relatability and sharing. And I think that's just my person as well. It must be difficult to feel that there's this like there's a professional and there's a personal side here, and there's
Yeah.
sometimes maybe in conflict.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
it's what I would have wanted. And I often say to my peers, I think as a therapist, you become the therapist that you would have wanted to have.
yeah,
So that's who I'm trying to be. And I think I would have wanted that from a therapist, certainly when I was really struggling with the stuff, to have sat with a therapist who'd been through the same thing and who got it.
yeah.
That would have been amazing for me at the time.
I agree. It's like when you hear someone say something, you're like, I've thought that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you must get it, to some degree. So yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, we did
And
that here. So go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to mention a couple of other episodes that we did. We did one about when intuitive eating doesn't work, coming at it from that angle,
Mm.
because I think you were saying something similar. I'd certainly did it, and I see people doing it a lot. They find intuitive eating, they give it a go for a short while, and then it doesn't seem to work. There's something about being able to maintain it, or feeling like, how do they measure progress? How do they know when they become an intuitive eater? So we talked a bit, didn't we, about some of the blocks that
Yeah.
people face with that.
Yeah, that one actually ended up spurring a bunch of posts that I ended up making on Instagram about that, and a video too. It was interesting because I had someone ask me, I think that same week, about, doing the intuitive eating program. And it's just kind of like that idea of it being a program and like another kind of program, and that mentality, and how that sort of, it's hard to move from dieting and like programs and, this detox or that plan or whatever. And then hear about intuitive eating, and it's easy to translate that into, okay, well, this is the program, and how that is sort of why it can make us feel stuck, or it's just it's a switch of mentality, really. And I hope we were able to clarify that a little bit for people who are listening, who are running into very common, I think, normal barriers in terms of why it might be feeling difficult, or it feels like I can't do this, it's not working for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And neither of us are particularly stringent about intuitive eating. I don't believe it's the only way. I think it's helpful. We both use the word framework, I think. I always use that
Yeah.
word, framework.
Yeah.
Take what you want, let go of the rest.
Yeah, that exactly.
But I think the episode that a lot of people might be interested in is the one, but I really want to lose weight.
Yeah.
Because isn't that's the biggest obstacle? Like, how do we let go of that, even though it's what we want? But we know that dieting isn't bringing us closer to it.
Yeah, and I think we shared there. I mean, I think that we did. We talked openly, we talked about the thoughts that come, and again, to normalize them, and how to handle them, what to do with them. Does it mean you're not doing this right? Does it mean you can't do this? How do you even balance them both? What do you do with the residual energy that brings? Yeah, that's certainly something I think of all. I don't want to say that as an absolute, but it's certainly one of the themes that probably feel the most relevant ongoing. Like, some concepts feel like, okay, I really have a handle on that, and I can move forward relatively confidently in this area, but weight loss is one that keeps hitting you over the head, like the more it's out there all the time, no matter how long you've been doing this. And there's those moments of vulnerability where those voices get louder, and how to see ourselves through that. Yeah, that was a really good episode. I liked that one a lot, actually, now that I'm remembering it.
Yeah, and the main point for me about I don't think it's about losing the desire to lose weight. I don't think that desire goes away. And we both shared that it's there, it comes up, sometimes stronger. It's about managing that desire. So we talk a bit about that as well.
Yes.
And then you did mention briefly the hunger episode that we talked about, not knowing when you're hungry. That was quite a helpful episode, actually.
Yeah, that one led into that one. I remember when we started to talk about it, I thought it was going to go one way, and it ended up going over here and over here. And I think we covered a lot of different types of experiences that can lead to, including feeling like, I don't know what you're talking about. I wish I could never not understand what that feels like. Like, I only ever feel hungry, or like that's, like some problem to have, which we did. We talked about that too. Yeah.
And we've got a whole list of ideas for more episodes to come. But if anybody has any suggestions, anybody listening, we are up for trying to create episodes that people want to listen to. What are the topics? What are the subjects that are important to people? What are the conversations that need to be had?
Yeah, because some of these questions, I think we try to answer in posts or videos, but I think there is something about a conversation, between two people bouncing ideas off of one another that helps, I think, move the topics. They're just more in depth, and just kind of take them to different places that we think that's the difference, right, of having a podcast versus having static content on social media. I think that it's all helpful in different ways.
Yeah. And I like to think we bring a whole wealth of experience to this, Culturally, obviously, you're over in the USA, I'm in the UK. You're a coach, I'm a therapist. We've both struggled with this stuff. And although we call it life after diets, a lot of it has focused on binge eating, really, because that's been such a big part of our stories too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe,
Binge eating, restriction too, how those interplay. Yeah. I think that that's our place, right? But I think we've tried to cover it more on a more general scale too. And hopefully you guys think so as well.
yeah. So if people want to check out the podcast, it's available right now. I've always wanted to say this. Can I be the one to say it?
Yeah, because I don't know what I can't remember.
Available on all major podcast platforms. That's what they say, right?
That is what they say. Oh my gosh. Thank you for the idea. I mean, you're the one who reached out and said, "Do you want to do this with me?"
No.
So,
well, thank you for agreeing to do it. I don't know if I'd have ever got round to it on my own. There's something about that, doing it with someone, it gives it a bit of structure and energy as well. So,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Steph. And so everybody out there, let us know what you think, if you want us to keep making them or not. We're probably going to, but, it'd be nice to know what you think as well anyway. I'm getting a lot out of it, even if
yeah, I love it. It's great. I'm absolutely enjoying myself a lot.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks, Steph.
Bye.